Hello, today's video is called What It's Like to Be Arrested. Today was day 16 of the public inquiry to the federal government for invoking the Emergency Act on February 2022. Today is November 3rd, 2022. The agenda for today is overview, key details, today's presentations, and my point of view. As we know, we are doing the daily summaries of the testimonies in the inquiry that seeks to understand if Justin Castro had valid reasons to invoke the Emergency Act on February 14, 2022, and also understand if the powers the federal government exercised exceeded the scope granted by the Act. Based on these findings, the lead commissioner will put forward a recommendation in English and French by February 2023. This is not a trial, it's an inquiry. All my videos are available on YouTube, Lisa Plus Research, as well as my own website, lisaplusresearch.com, and the live feed for the inquiry and previous inquiries is found on the link below. Key details that will help navigate through the different testimonies, some jurisdictions and short forms are shown here. A quick timeline with some key dates, key locations that are referred through the process of the examination. Very important, and I will be more focused on this moving forward because the more I hear about these testimonies, the more I realize this has nothing to do with the original objective. The objective is to understand if there were valid reasons to invoke the Emergency Act. Those reasons are the following. You can prove there was espionage. You can prove there were foreign activities happening in the territory of Canada. You can prove that there was threat of use of violence for ideological, political, or religious reasons, or you can prove that there was violence against property to achieve political objectives or overthrow the government of Canada. Throughout the whole set of testimonies of the police officers, we consistently heard there was not enough proof of any of these. So from the police perspective, you couldn't have supported this Emergency Act being called. Further, from February 13, we have the email between Carrick as well as Loki, that is the highest rank on the RCMP, stating that the Emergency Act should not be invoked and there was no reason to do it. So clearly the reasons are not there. And most importantly, the reason why this inquiry is taking place is really not being met. We're going to see it through the testimonies today. Today we had a presentation, we had three witnesses between 9:30 and 7:30 p.m. So it was a very lengthy day. We had the senior counsel for the commission, a gentleman, Daniel Shepard, and he was presenting a lot of information regarding the evolution of the conversations with GoFundMe, as well as the specific dates that when the GoFundMe was blocked and the different areas of the government were in contact with GoFundMe to freeze these funds. Here we can see also how all the funds that were being collected based on people, I don't know if you donated, I donated, even to a convoy in Australia, all the funds were prevented to be used by court order. And then here there was a moment when they actually explained how much money was raised. And by the time GoFundMe had $10 million, 1 million, even though with a certain amount of time was released to TD Bank on Tamara, but it was immediately frozen. And then apparently up to that point, there was something like $420,000 in e-transfers. She had a different account for that. And it was also frozen. And there was only $26,000 that was accessed and it was given to a tracker. So you can see how there is $1.4 million in an escrow as a result of the injunction and obviously the development that took place in Ottawa. And then there was another set of money, something like 1.4 million over here somewhere. Can't remember where it is. 141 in escrow, 3.5 in escrow, other minor accounts. The big picture here is there's a lot of money in an escrow, and it feels like everybody's here trying to establish who's going to take care of that money. It's a lot of money. It's over $20 million from what you see here from the official report from the counselor of the commission. The first witness was a gentleman called Benjamin Dichter. I actually heard of him because he did an interview with Fox. That was the first time I knew of him and about him. It just felt very, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. I just couldn't even listen to him. I just wrote about 10 or 20 minutes after he started talking. I said, this is odd. I don't believe a word he says. And I just stopped listening to him because his story doesn't make sense. He said that he grew up in a middle class and he was a diamond grader, and then shortly before the pandemic in 2019 he started to drive a truck. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you go into the most difficult of all businesses in that time when all the regulations were starting? And then when he was asked, where would you go and what would you do? Well, I was just moving commodities like paper. I don't know. I really don't know. Here, there was a questioning about the division and obviously the fight for power. The approach from the convoy organizer council was very aggressive. I thought that they were aligned, but clearly they are not. And they were talking about board issues. And I sort of understand why they created a board. It was like a group of people to try to make sure that the transparency for the funds was present. But at the same time, it feels like a corporation. It feels like a company that was with a lot of bureaucratic levels and was not allowing for the real objective that was fight for freedom to take place. And obviously, as everybody may remember or not, I don't know, he actually had a series of accidents and he was out of, quote, commission for an extended period of time, and he was not active on the ground as much as he may have wanted or as much as many people expected, like the Ottawa police counselor who was asking him about this picture and saying, did you take that picture? And he responded, well, I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't take it because you can see there's a lot of snow. So obviously a lot of miscommunication about his involvement. And here he said that he spoke to an owner of a cafe, and then the owner said to him that it was the government who was asking him to close or he would be given a $150 penalty if he wouldn't. So it actually starts to question, because all the counselors from the government are saying that the violence of the truckers, particularly in the Rideau Sussex intersection, was creating the violent situation in which they were forced to close and lose a lot of money. But if this is true, then you can see how there is a contradiction in these stories. So it comes to a point that there are so many versions of the events that it's very tough to say what really happened, except if you were filming everything, which obviously we don't have a tape of every single corner of the city. I didn't like when he was asked by the Ottawa businesses and residents, specifically which cafe told him that the fine would be $150 if he wouldn't close. And then he said, well, it was Iconic Cafe that told me. And I was thinking, you should never give names. Again, he's under oath, so I understand, but it just feels like it's a lot of gathering information to use against other people in the future. That's what it felt to me today. Here, were you aware of the conversations with PLT? And he said, no, they seem to be running their own show. So you can see, obviously, tons of disconnections between different parties and a lot of egos. I have the sense that he has a big ego, and obviously he wanted to play an important role. And I'm sure that he was frustrated because with good or bad intentions, he ended up in a wheelchair, as he says, or at least with crutches, and he couldn't be on the ground. Interesting here, they were talking about passwords, and later in the testimony of Tamara Lynch, she would confirm that Tamara gave him, Benjamin, the password to her Twitter account. So she was attributed things that he actually said. So I find that easy to believe because, of course, she was busy and she trusted him, but very tough because imagine giving your password to your social media account. You must really trust that person. So it talks about the level of trust that there were between them, but obviously, in my opinion, he broke trust because the deal that Tamara was doing with the city was legitimate at that point in time, and he was tweeting it is not legitimate. So they went on and on. The founder of New Blue Ontario, I did a little bit of research about this company. I don't understand what he was allowed to ask some questions. And then they were talking about the hashtag honk, replace the honk itself. They went on and on about social media. I really didn't understand what was the point. The second witness, James Bowder. And I think that in this specific case, they're trying to associate him with violence to overthrow the government as we were talking about here are the four reasons. So the commissioner is investigating, and the government of Canada is always going to try to build a case towards proving that that's the case. He was giving testimony about the fact that he has been in a truck since he was a kid, which I found it was very interesting and beautiful. And then he said, well, he started to be uncomfortable with the level of the measurements that were being imposed by public health, and then he wanted to come together as a community. He is obviously consistently saying the same message, that he found all the public health measures unlawful. He said it multiple times throughout his testimony, and he wanted to bring people together. And he actually said to the commissioner counselor, what I meant by bear hug. I don't know if you remember, yesterday was, and the day before as well, they were talking about, explain to me what bear hug is, because obviously they want to portray it as a negative encircling of the city of Ottawa to, quote, choke the operations in the city. But he explained it as it's about hugging people and bringing them together. And it was interesting because he said, a hug brings people together. Do you want a demonstration? And obviously the counselor said no. But I thought that was very interesting. And then he was asked by the counselor, did you go on day one out to such and such store without a mask? And he said, yes, I went out without a mask every day. So clearly they're just trying to prove the case, that he was against the mandates, etc. But it's just incredibly difficult to hear the repetition of the same things. Is unlawful, is unlawful. And his motivation was the fact that he actually told the story. He was telling his friends, my motivation is the fact that I was telling some friends, we lost something, I'm trying to find it. And the friends were saying, what are you looking for? What did you lose? And he said, our freedom. I thought it was a very interesting story. His testimony was very emotional. He cried on the stand. And if anyone was really following his heart, so to speak, is this gentleman. He said that he was baptized in the faith of Jesus and God in the last year or so, and now he's just full of love for everyone. He doesn't believe in divisions anymore. So he obviously talked about the Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, that we have heard many times. I didn't understand till this point in time what was the famous Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, and it's a 15-page document in both English and French that was built, or written, should I say, between him, a gentleman called Martin Brodman, that is the president of United Trucks, and also a driver, and his wife. And all he wanted was to address the Senate to ask them to revoke the power over the prime minister, because obviously he was exceeding his powers and doing unlawful things. So I thought it was interesting because he said, I sent it to many places, but nobody ever signed it. So it's just a piece of paper because it was never signed. And then he was talking about details of the memorandum and dissecting every single point, but he confirmed multiple times it was not my intention to remove the government. I was just following the legal avenue to make sure that these unlawful things would not happen anymore. This is again the same line of questioning from the government and the commissioner. Did you have contact with Windsor? Did you have contact with Coots? Did you have contact with this person? Did you know Pat King beforehand? Did you know this person beforehand? And the reality is that through every single testimony, which by the way, it feels like they're gathering evidence against all these people who have open cases right now. All these people show here because they have a subpoena. They have their own lawyers. So it's very dangerous for them to speak. And nevertheless, they are compelled to speak, disclose a lot of information. And all I feel that the government is trying to do is trying to understand what is the logical sequence of events that took place to organize such a big movement, because obviously the infrastructure and the logistics are massive. I spoke about the logistics since day one. This was such a big undertaking, and I couldn't understand how they could be so well organized. So obviously it's the same question that the government is trying to understand. But in reality, the only thing that happened is that different people with variations of the same motivation of give me back my freedom, they just came together to express the frustration about the government actions that they were felt, and I feel the same way, were and continue to be unlawful. So obviously that is the motivation, and the government keeps on bringing this together in every single witness. Did you know this person? And did you know this person? And were you in contact with Windsor? And everybody says absolutely not. This is the location, the Confederation Park, where James was located. So you can see that is relatively close to Parliament Hill, but it's not in the infamous Wellington area that is exactly in front of the Parliament. Here they were showing the moment when he was arrested and the moment when he wanted, and by him I mean James, wanted to prove to the commissioner councillor that this is his truck or SUV or whatever you call it. Sorry, I know there's a better word, so sorry about that. His vehicle was there, and the police officers, you can hear them saying, back this out and get out. And then he said, listen, I can't back this up. First of all, there's too much snow, and second, look, I can't do it. So obviously they told him, okay, then go and check out of your hotel. I'll give you a few minutes, and then you have to go or you are going to be arrested. I mean, you can't do that. You have your things upstairs, etc. So he ended up being arrested. And then he cried. He cried because he was saying, I was blocked by the Ottawa police and then I got arrested, but I really feel that it was our opportunity to show the world the biggest movement of unity. And obviously he's calling in the documents and throughout his testimony that what we all know, that the crime minister is actually not doing his job. He's dividing people. And obviously he's continuously saying, I am not going to do this. And I can't say these words because, of course, I can't be talking freely in Canada or I will get deplatformed. He's not going to do this because it's my medical right. And I am 100% with him in that. So here they were talking about some information that he provided to police officers regarding some guns that were potentially dangerous for the community. And then the police officers later in his testimony, they informed him that his information was very valuable and they actually arrested the individuals that had the guns. Here, they talked about the MOU, and I thought that the convoy counselor would be a little bit more kind to him. He was very aggressive, and in the end, he didn't. I mean, it's just pure courtesy when you come in to the stand, you say, good morning, Mr. Whatever, how are you? It was actually his birthday. It was James Bowder's birthday. And then when you finish, you say, thank you very much, or something polite. Well, he walked away, didn't even say anything, and it was actually James who said, thank you very much. So very rude and uncalled for, in my opinion, but obviously people have feelings and he disliked him. Ottawa police, again, Ottawa police actually surprises me. I don't understand if they do this purposely. I don't think that's the case because James said he did 2 convoys in 2019. It was a convoy that said only 3 days, but he clarified that he was not the organizer. And in 2022, the one that we are talking about in this inquiry, he was saying, yes, I was coming from the east. And then the Ottawa police counselor said, oh, so you were coming from the west? I'm like, no, I'm thinking, what is he listening to? So they showed him some documents, some maps, and then they started to say, Ottawa police counselor said to say, and then you posted in such and such date that 9/11 is a conspiracy theory from the government, and then you wrote this word, and then you said that the U.S. elections were stolen, and then James said to him, what does it have to do with anything? We're here to talk about the Emergency Act. This was unlawfully invoked by the crime minister. That's what we're here to talk about. So I fully agree with him. I don't understand. It's very disturbing to me that they go through your social media, said in 2011 at 9 a.m. you said this and that. Like, oh my gosh, that is crazy to me. Here, there was the update that I was mentioning before, that the information that he gave about the firearms actually helped them, the OPP, to arrest some people. And then here, the Ottawa Residence Councillor, this gentleman is getting on my nerves. This gentleman is just beyond. You can't even imagine. He's always creating a problem out of nowhere. And then here, what was the plan to insert? They're talking about Berhak, and then the Ottawa Residents Coalition asked him, what was the plan, to encircle downtown? And he said, no, to talk with the federal government. And then the Ottawa Residents Council said, but if you follow the law, you will find that these, it was James who said, if you follow the law, you will find that these mandates were breaking the law. So I just love when he said that. But obviously the Ottawa residents said, oh, so your rights are more important than others' rights, because if they are following the law of wearing a mask, you are telling them not to wear a mask. And then he said, you're asking Canadians to participate in unlawful mandates. So these mandates will be proven they were unlawful. History will prove that, not me. And I found that fascinating because we all know that is true. At least those who are listening to this video, I'm certain, or you wouldn't be listening to me. Because the government imposed this unlawful mandate. So he kept on going over and over the same thing. So what is interesting is that at a certain point in time, this counselor ended up saying, the question was, so because the government imposed these unlawful mandates, then it's okay for you to do that? Like James got the lawyer to admit that they were unlawful, which is fascinating. It's just this counselor, I don't know. He's just not, I don't know. And then he pulled some text that is a transcript of a conversation of a podcast or maybe Zoom meeting or whatever between James and the infamous Pat King, that it just sounds like he's the most persecuted person in this whole situation. And the proof is that his funds and his accounts are still frozen until today. Everybody has had the opportunity to recuperate and reactivate the accounts except him. So there's a transcript of a conversation between James and Pat King, and then Paul Champ, the Ottawa Residents Council, said, so when you're being asked, what was the cat in the bag at that date? Like, oh my gosh, this is so unprofessional. It just sounds honestly like pure comedy, and it just feels that we're not getting anywhere. What difference does it make if I say that's the cat in the bag, meaning that is X or Y or Z? It makes no difference. We're here to determine if the Emergency Act was invoked rightfully or wrongfully. And then there was a moment when the Ottawa Residents Council again continued being disrespectful. And then he said, well, when you're talking about Operation Big Hug, do you apply pressure to the people that you're hugging? So obviously he's just being very confrontational. And then the lead commissioner got mad. You can see his face. And he said, I am having a problem with you, council. I have a problem. And then obviously James, who's totally respectful, said, I'm so sorry. Am I doing anything wrong? And then the lead commissioner said, no, it's not you. It's the counselor. So obviously it was really absurd. Then when the Justice Center Constitutional Freedom Counselor, which today was doing a fantastic job, he interrupted him. You can see him playing with the mask, interrupted him in a very disrespectful manner again. So what was beautiful about this moment is that this gentleman actually was very respectful to James and said, I am building a case to prove that the Emergency Act was invoked unlawfully. So in order for you to help me, I need yes or no answers, because of course James was very prone to go for extended periods of time answering with his beliefs. So it's not necessarily useful for the merits of what they are trying to say. So he managed to get yes and no's from James, which was fantastic. And then it's just awful because he said, can I go back to the stand and ask another question? And honestly, I think the lead commissioner should have said no. Nobody has been allowed to come back. But he came back and he said, well, you talk about everybody being equal and your love for God and your religious beliefs, but you wrote that about this Justina. So is it because it's transgender? I'm like, oh my God, are you accusing Castro of being this? This counselor did that today. I don't understand. So his answer from James was, no, it's just that I'm an alpha Western man, and when I look at him, I don't think he's that. But at the end, he said, Kana, thank you so much. It was a precious moment. West versus East and Quebec versus West stopped, etc. And I mean, I felt it. It was beautiful. But it was very interesting. He was allowed a little bit of a platform to talk about his beliefs. But this counselor, oh my God, he must be in trouble. Third and final witness, perhaps the one that everybody was waiting to hear from, because she's going to determine a lot of the, or put a little bit of clarity over all the different beliefs, Tamara Leach. So she talked about her background, the fact that she was in the board of Wexit, that is obviously the movement that seeks independence of the west of Canada from the rest of the nation. She's not a trucker. And then she was talking about a lot of her inspirations, and they're going to try to prove that she was leading violence for ideological reasons, because of course she explained she had family throughout the different provinces. She has one daughter in one province, her parents in another province, and she lives in a third province. So obviously the moment when the government is saying you cannot move between, quote, borders, I actually experienced that myself. I couldn't move. I am less than 1 hour to the border to Ontario, and I had to move 3 or 4 times, and I was stopped. And I'm not doing anything wrong. I am a free Canadian. Why can't I move? So it created a lot of problems for people who actually had to do a back and forth because of work or because of family or an emergency, whatever the case might be. Or even if you just want to go out, have a coffee in a different province. I mean, why are you being stopped? Here, it was just ridiculous. The commission counselor, did you make a conscious decision to click on follow Pat King? Why did you make that decision? Like, oh my gosh, this was crazy. They are demonizing this gentleman every single day. And this level of detail means nothing. Big picture, we're trying to prove if there was enough information for the government to call the Emergency Act. Why are we talking about if she clicked? And why did she click? And at what time did she click? Did you take your coffee this morning before you click? Like, what difference does it make? So you can see how all they're doing, from my perspective, of course, I could be wrong, it feels like they're just digging for information to try to understand what is the logistical infrastructure that allowed them to do what they did, when in reality, every single person under oath is telling, I never met this person until on the ground, and I may have talked to this person 5 times or maybe 3 times. So it was just really difficult to hear. Here, she actually also cried on the stand, talking about, this is really painful because I know it's true. There are many stories here in Quebec, particularly when there's a difference between Ontario and Quebec. I lived in Ontario for 20 years and I've been in Quebec for 3 years. And there's a lot of independence in terms of restaurants, gyms, and a lot of businesses in comparison to Ontario. So when you don't have deep pockets because you're not part of a chain, your ability to be able to keep your business afloat, so to speak, and over a break-even point is just more difficult. So I heard from direct sources that there were a lot of owners of restaurants that were being found on their own restaurants after committing suicide. So that is very painful. People don't talk about that, but that's what is happening to a lot of people who actually don't have any options. So she was talking about that specific thing. In her specific town, there were so many suicides that they stopped counting. So I mean, in a small community, you feel the pain more. In a big community here, I don't know a lot of these restaurant owners. I obviously have not been in a lot of restaurants since this pandemic started, but it's painful to hear. So imagine for her. And obviously, she said, when I hear my prime minister, I love that she said my prime minister. That was very nice of her. I wouldn't do that. But she said, it's calling me a racist. And I saw old ladies praying and their kids holding signs saying, thank you for bringing me back my future. So obviously she felt the trust and the inspiration from so many people. And obviously she became very nervous when she got the $1 million. And obviously she never received the money, but it was a very heavy weight. You can see how she was very perhaps uncomfortable. And she wanted to make sure that there was transparency from day one to make sure that people would be seeing what she was doing with the money. Actually, it was an interesting story. When Chris Barber and her created their first GoFundMe, Chris said, oh, let's aim for $200,000 goal. And she said, no, that's too much. Let's put 100. And it was very funny because obviously we know how big it went. It surpassed 10 million after it was frozen. I'm sure that it would have got many more millions. So Here, she tried to pay for the Wilson flight. Remember when yesterday the first witness, the lawyer that was coming from Edmonton to help them on the ground, and she tried to pay for that flight and it was denied, and that's when she realized that the funds were actually being frozen. Here, obviously, they went deep into why did you allow the Twitter account to be managed by Benjamin. And she said, well, I trusted him. I considered him my friend prior to a convoy. And then the counselor asked, are you still friends? This is really sad. I'm not allowed to speak to him anymore. And again, they keep on hammering this thing. When was the first time you met Pat King? Oh my God, they're obsessed with that gentleman. She was in jail 19 days, and she was asked why all your text messages are deleted. And she said she had commanding her phone, so after 30 days everything was erased, etc. So she doesn't know what she received or didn't receive. I find fascinating that this commission counselor is asking, okay, where is your text and why did you erase it? Everybody knows that all the providers can pull your texts with any date at any given time. So making a fuss of that, maybe they're trying to prove intentionality, but other than that, you can find the text. It's not a big deal. Same line of questioning, were you in communications with Coates, with Ottawa, with Windsor, etc. And then the emails with the major, and then they went into the tweeting from her account, and then they asked her if she ever had a conversation with Benjamin about this, and she said, well, listen, it was so fast, and then it was the Emergency Act, and then we had to leave, so I don't remember really talking about this. And then this is the title of the video. What is it like to be arrested? Why is she being asked that? Of course she's going to cry. And then you can read in yellow all the impactful things, and obviously it's just very unpleasant to hear that being asked. And you know how much it adds to this inquiry? Zero. I don't understand if you're torturing these people, if you're parading them in front of Canadians to shame them so nobody else will ever stand up, to demoralize and demotivate us. I don't know. It's just not something that feels very smart. My point of view scores Ben Richter 0/10. I just, honestly, I could be wrong. I just don't believe anything he says. I couldn't even listen to him. I didn't listen to him more than 10-15 minutes. James Bowder, infinite respect. It feels like he operates from his heart. Beautiful, beautiful soul. Love him. Tamara Leish, I give him 10/10. It feels like she's sincere, but her testimony has not finished. Tomorrow we're going to have the cross-examination. So today was just the direct from the counselor from the commission. Thank you very much for listening.